Hello and welcome to North 100, the Canadian Highlander podcast. I'm Serge. Joining me as always, I have a Jer.
Hi.
An Alex.
Heyo.
And a Ben.
Still Wheeler.
A reminder that North 100 is brought to you by you with your support over at the Patreon, over at patreon.com/LoadingReadyRun. Let's start off today's episode the same way we start every episode, the best card that you're not playing. Up today, I have a Hot Wheels. Wheeler, tell me what you're playing.
So this one's a bit of it's a slow burn, but you'll start to really grasp it.
All right.
My card choice is Bring to Light.
Ooh.
Bring to Light is a 5-mana sorcery, 3 colorless, a green, and a blue that has Converge. So you search your library for a creature, instant, or sorcery card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of colors of mana spent to cast Bring to Light. You exile that card that you found, shelf of your library, and then you can cast that card without paying its mana cost.
Seems good.
So it's not exactly something that is, forgotten off in the corner. Nobody really sees Bring to Light, but it's often just relegated into Scapeshift decks or the Curb Your Enthusiasm decks. And I've found a lot of personal success playing this card in eggs variants, different Academy shells as well, and myself, but more famously other players have found this in Pat Pod decks. So 3-color or 4-color Kiki Jiki birthing pod decks.
Oh, yeah.
While it is tempting to, use this, find Scapeshift, kill people, use this, find your Time Walk, and start going off, the flexibility that this card can offer in the Kiki decks being finding pretty much every creature under the sun, and while it can't find Birthing Pod, being able to find, the titular Kiki Jiki, finding any of Reclamation Sage, Night of Autumn, Glenalendra, any of the other combo pieces, as well as finding some of your more flexible tutor spells in decks like Eggs or Paradox. So a Time Twister, a Second Sunrise, an Auriok Salvagers, whatever it may be.
Where does this card land next to Wargate?
I was going to say the exact same thing.
I think this card is a lot more applicable than Wargate.
Interesting. And
Yeah.
in Academy as well?
Wargate's
Sorry.
permanent only?
Yes,
Yeah,
it's any permanent.
It's permanent only. Often the more powerful spells, like the card most got with Bring to Light is Time Walk, and the second most is Scapeshift. And so those are just 2 lines of play that Wargate doesn't enable. And the most powerful thing you can do with Wargate is cast it for X = 0 to get a really powerful land.
Like Academy.
Yeah,
Typically Academy.
the amount of Wargates that I've cast lifetime is quite high, and more often than not, it's either finding Academy or Black Lotus.
Yeah, okay.
Interesting. Spend 3 mana to get 3 mana.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, spend 3 mana to get 20 mana,
Yeah.
or kill your opponent.
Huh. Neat. Yeah, definitely seen Bring to Light. And again, as you were saying, more in the combo shell, but it's interesting to think of fair Bring to Light.
Well, it's also just like a dual spell.
Well, kind
Yeah.
of fair, but you know what I mean.
Well, as fair as,
It's also just a really awesome toolbox card because often lots of these decks will include bounce spells, some removal spells like Assassin's Trophy or Abrupt Decay, and this is just another tutor to get those if you are in the situation that you need them. And having more tutors for your toolbox cards is always good.
I have a question.
Yo.
How long does the you may cast that card clause last for?
You have to cast it.
Right then.
Oh.
Yeah, you can't wait till end of turn. It doesn't just sit there. It's just okay, Bring to Light resolves. You can just exile a card and leave it if you wanted to.
Well, that's...
You could.
You could... I mean, is this playable in
No.
Food
Food
Chain?
Chain.
I knew where you were going with it.
Yeah.
Leave it in
Okay.
exile.
There's Manipulate Fate and what's the slow trip one?
Oh god, it's from Alliances.
Yep.
So
should
what Alex is referencing there, the Food Chain combo has a couple of the way it goes infinite. Actually, let's start with. Do you know what Food Chain does off the top of your head, Jer?
Yeah, it's 2 and a green for an enchantment. It has an activated ability that's a mana ability. You can exile a creature you control to make X mana of any color, where X is the removed creature's converted mana cost +1. and it can only be spent to cast creature spells.
There are a couple of creatures you can cast from exile.
There's 3.
And the purpose of Food Chain and the exile ones is you can cast them infinite and generate infinite mana. So Alex was alluding to, oh, what if you just left those creatures in exile? Wouldn't that just set you up for your combo for Food Chain?
It's also like there's no reason to not just cast them.
Well, not to be nitpicky, I think there's more than 3 creatures that end up getting cast from exile.
3 playable ones in the Food Chain.
You got Errant Ephemeron.
Oh boy.
Oh, God.
You've got Greater Gargadon.
You're just showing off now, Ben.
Well, no, he's just naming
I'm just
all
being-
the suspend creatures.
Yeah, I'm just being...
Oh, okay, okay. Boo.
Get out of here.
Lilith.
Yeah, oh yeah.
All right, friends, let us talk about today's theme. And this came up actually in the latest Friday Night Paper Fight, which we played last Friday, which was Alex, myself, and then Cam and Adam, which was how do you play around some of those pesky, powerful cards or archetypes? There was a beautiful moment on the Friday Night Paper Fight where Adam got to experience the joy that is Umezawa's Jitte for the first time. You just sit down and you look at this card equipped to your creature. You're like, it does everything. How do you beat this card? Well, boy, do we have an episode for you. So to start off, let's get a very an introductory definition on what does it mean to play around a card, Jer.
So playing around a card implies that you're taking lines of play that put you in better stead if your opponent has a particular card. So this could be a removal spell, a certain type of removal spell, a counter spell, a discard spell. And so you just take a line of play that sort of like hedges against an opponent having one of those specific things.
And the other part of our episode is also going to be about building around that certain thing, because sometimes beating a card in your opponent's deck happens before you even get to the tournament. It's anticipating a card, and you're metagaming and getting ready to face that. Back to Jared, what does it mean to build around something?
So it's a similar concept, just at a higher level. So when you're building your deck, you take into account, often people think of, what did I lose to last week? Oh, did I lose to counterspells? All right, I'll put in things that are good against counterspells. So either things with that enable you to act at instant speed, or things that can't be countered. Or
You're actually kind of describing the process by which Black Mold kind of evolved, because it took the mono black aggro, or like Sui Black, and added a little bit of green so it wouldn't fold to artifacts and enchantments.
Yeah. All right, let's go into our first case study here. Hey, Alex, you know what sucks?
What?
Oh boy, I can never resolve any of my spells. My opponent always seems to have the answer there. I cast a creature and they always get countered. Blue is basically unbeatable. What do I do, Alex?
Well, Steve, excuse me. Playing around counterspells, the conundrum. So, counterspells early on in your Magic career are going to seem invincible and unbeatable and unfair.
They answer everything.
Kinda. They answer everything in a very narrow window of opportunity.
they only answer it before it happens.
Yeah, and once you sort of in some ways it kind of helps playing with counterspells, and then you start to better grasp their weaknesses.
Just how fragile they are.
Yeah, you sort of realize it's like, oh, my pants are soaking now as I'm just staring down all these threats. And then you're like, okay.
Everybody's got a plan until a goblin guide punches them right in the mouth.
Yeah. Counterspells are incredibly powerful until something hits the table, and then they are worthless.
Yep.
They have zero ability to deal with an in-play threat. And there's a number of ways you can do that.
Yeah, let's talk about how do you get through that first counterspell.
So I think the classic example is the bait spell.
Ooh. So what is a bait spell?
So bait spell is you present a threat to your opponent, and it's a weird mix of psychology and opportunity to make this appear as though it's the biggest, nastiest, meanest threat you have to offer.
Yep.
So they have to counter it. And this could be as simple as playing your second best creature, or your second best planeswalker or something. You play that out. They're like, okay, well, I have to counter this, or they choose to not counter it, and then you stick it anyways.
Yeah.
And if they do counter it, you follow it up with your actual threat.
The old 1-2. You're giving them the Kansas City Shuffle.
Pretty much. So you sort of, you know, you're expending a threat to cover a bigger threat.
I actually think this builds on one of like the higher level things in ways to be counterspells, which is being able to cast multiple things in the same turn.
Yeah.
That doesn't always exist with the bait spell. Sometimes you separate them by a turn, but that only beats one counterspell. Whereas often one of the things that chokes the control decks, especially earlier on, like pre-turn 5, is that they're only able to cast one counterspell per turn. So often a thing I see newer players or even experienced players still do this is on turn 3 especially, they'll have 2/2-drop threats left in their hand. And so they have an option. They can cast 1 on turn 3 or they can cast 2 on turn 4. And most people don't see it like this. So often against a very reactive control deck, it's actually better to do nothing on turn 3, assuming you just have the 2 mana threats in your hand. Do nothing on turn 3, then play both on turn 4.
Right, so
And
you don't
then-
set yourself up to get countered on turn 3 and countered on turn 4.
Exactly.
Interesting.
It's also kind of this neat little heads up where most control decks, if they aren't using your counterspell, so if they keep up mana to have a counterspell, and they're expecting you to deploy some kind of threat, and you don't, they're not going to be able to get full use of that 3 mana. Because a lot of the cantrips or things that they'll say like, oh, I'll either counter a spell, and if that doesn't happen, then I get to cast Brainstorm, or I get to cycle this land, or cast Impulse, whatever it may be. It doesn't effectively use that 3 mana up, so they're kind of losing out on their own curve. And then when you deploy the threats, they're stuck with either using up 2 cards for your 2 cards, great, or they have this 3 mana counterspell in hand that they're playing off curve, and you get to kind of goozle them by going 2-drop into 2-drop.
Here's a really great thing to play around counterspells. It's sort of on a deck building axis, but creatures with flash.
Yeah, the old end step.
They also make great bait spells.
Yep.
Because you flash them end of their turn. They're like, well, I got to counter this. And if they do, you're like, haha, I untap and cast my real problem. But also just like snaking them in when they're busy with something
When the
else.
shields are down.
Well, yeah, often control decks say you have a flash threat in your hand. On turn 4 is the key turn when the bigger draw spells start happening, like Factor Fiction, Glimmer of Genius, Hard Casting, Hieroglyphic Illumination, now Chemister's Insight, which I think is a playable Highlander magic card. So the 4 mana draw spells are where you actually start to get card advantage in Highlander, which is actually pretty hard to get. Like, you can get virtual card advantage and 2-for-1s out of other cards, but getting actual more cards than you put into a card is difficult. And being able to sorry, I lost my train of thought. Being able to
Take advantage of when they go shields down.
yeah, exactly. So if they cast this on your end step, even though it's still your end step, you can then resolve your Restoration Angel or your Wolf-Fury Avenger. Or,
I don't
So
want
they
to
have,
talk.
more cards, but they have no mana, and you get to just start cracking it.
And let's not worry about overextending into Wrath. We're just talking about beating the counterspell. So we've talked about, multiple spells in a turn. We've talked about waiting for them to go shields down. I really like the idea of actually skipping a turn as the aggressive player to get 2 threats down in a turn to try and take advantage of the stuff there. How can you build around a control deck? A deck with counterspells. Again, not worry about wraths. Like when you're bringing a deck to your tournament, and Jer's going to be there. Jer is always on Seinfeld, the stupid deck that does nothing but counter all my spells. How do I beat unfun Jeremy over here, the counterspell
Actually,
king?
I was gonna say not to jump the queue, but something that I was gonna talk about that actually kind of works into this is I left something kind of obvious till later as an example, which is can't be countered.
Seems good.
There's not all that many that are really good, but the ones that are pretty good. So we're talking like these are mostly in like green and
Wait.
Green, white.
green and white.
Green,
Yeah,
Green,
for the
white,
creatures.
green, white.
And a red occasionally has some burn spells that can't be countered?
yeah,
Or is it just
very
Bane Fire?
occasionally, but it's like there's not that many. But yeah, these are good spells. The pool is not super deep, but there's other can't be countered threats that don't have the text can't be countered on it, but work nonetheless. This is why creature lands
Yep.
are good. So Mutavault, for example, can't be countered as a creature spell.
I think it's important to create a divide, though, in that it's not necessarily gunning for any particular individuals or even saying like, oh, my metagame has these two players that I really don't want to lose to. That sort of stuff. 'Cause
Okay.
That you,
Well, that's a vendetta.
Well, yeah.
And
Other
trust
than
me-
that-
We've discussed this with Serge's example when he builds decks exactly to beat Ben.
Yeah.
it doesn't.
Never-
Loses in round 1 to somebody who's not Ben, and Ben still wins the round.
Yeah, it's. I mean,
Too real. Yeah, I've tried to headhunt the elusive wheeler and it doesn't work.
You'll
more
you'll
counters.
never kill me. I feel like I'll bring this up a bunch, but you got to ask yourself, am I just going to lose to Goblin Guide with this kind of deck? So, like, if you're looking for cards to beat out hard control decks, you should look to more powerful cards. Something like Thrun, something like Dragon Lord Dramoka.
Oh, baby.
Then even give the new Nullhide Ferox a shot.
Yep.
That kind of stuff. Don't go to cards like Skylasher or Prowling Serpapard, another good card, stuff like that. But don't play Skylasher is like 1 in a green for a 2/2 flash. Can't be countered. Reach pro blue. Like
It does everything. Look at it, Ben. Look how many keywords this card has.
Yeah, look at it. It's a 2-mana 2/2. It's a bear with flash, but like Ashcoat Grizzly has better art than this card.
Ashcoat Bear.
Is it Ashcoat Bear? All right, Ashcoat Bear has better art than this card. So why not just play that? In fact, don't play either of those. Play a real card. So like, don't go too deep.
It
Because
does look like a grizzly.
yeah.
So you're saying in your advice to beat the control deck, don't get so fixated on just baking that you actually beating that deck that you make your deck worse.
Yeah, because you got to beat other decks too. Like if
Well, I
you
was
just
gonna say that like if you build harnessing only your tilt energy, it's gonna be bad.
yeah, this is where the difference between metagaming and whatnot comes.
That's how I started playing Prison, Alex.
If you like are expecting to play a room of 7 different blue decks, then I still don't know if I would tell you to sleeve up Skylasher in your mono green aggro deck or your green white deck. Like there are just better things to do.
Yeah.
But I mean that's a extreme example because you'll sleeve up your Skylasher and then your round 1 opponent will play an Isamaru.
Or a Brimaz.
Or
Whoa,
Brimaz.
then
And you'll be
you're-
like, oh, I made a huge mistake. Why did I do this to myself?
Another good way to beat control is in conjunction with these threats is to play stickier threats or more devastating threats. So that when your things resolve, they'll win you the game.
Right.
So things like Hazaret out of mono red is incredibly difficult for control decks to deal with because even if she's not able to attack, her activated ability will finish the game relatively quickly.
Yep.
She is indestructible, so she's very difficult to deal with in combat and remove from the board. Another classic one against blue decks is Armageddon. So if you're able to play
Can't counter if you have no lands.
exactly, and against the blue decks, you should be ahead on board by the time you're casting Armageddon. If you're behind on board
Wow.
against a blue deck, you're going to have a bad time.
To cap this off, there's a pretty strong theme between the cards like Armageddon and Hazaret. And it's what I like to call, and several other Victoria players like to call, cowboy magic.
Go
You
on.
just make them have it.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, sometimes, yeah, if they got counterspells, they're going to counter your spell. But there's only one way to find out whether or not they
Make them
have
have
it. You just make them have it. Because if they counter your Hazaret, so what? They countered your spell. They'll counter whatever pops up in front of them at that point of the game. But if they don't, then you got
they
this
lose.
threat they can never deal with and they lose.
Yep.
Same with Armageddon. Same with if you're playing like combo decks. Sometimes you just got to go for it and make sure, make them have it.
Yeah, I can't wait to protect it.
In this situation where you're like, oh man, I need to wait till I draw one of Inquisition of Kozilek, Thoughtseize, or Duress. And I've seen combo players do this. They're like waiting till they get one of those 3 cards. Meanwhile, the control deck is drawing live to 20 counterspells.
Yeah,
What do you think's gonna happen? They draw 1 counterspell, or you draw one of 20 counterspells, or you draw one of 3 discard spells.
These Haymaker cards also come down on these turns where, as we previously mentioned, the control decks are going to try to recoup their losses from slinging Doomblades and Mana Leaks. And so you're not giving them time to breathe.
And
right?
these are also the turns where they're more likely to go shields down for a turn to play a Jace or play a threat of their own that they're going to try to win the game with. And if you're able to counterpunch them with something that just devastates them and wins the game, then you win the game.
It's like if they're taking their rest in the corner in a boxing match, and you just jump kick them right in the eye.
They're not
Well,
not entirely legal.
It's less cheating than that.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, what Alex is describing is while they're casting a spell, you just slip a card on the table while they're not looking.
Don't play cheaty face in Highlander.
Please don't cheat. All right, now let's move on to our next card. We've been talking about a lot of very powerful threats. We talked about Karakas, we talked about Hazaret. In some case, we talked about Thrun. Now, something all these cards have in common is their legendary creatures, which brings us to another very interesting card that's seen a lot of play in Highlander, which is Karakas, a legendary land that returns a legendary creature to its owner's hand. All right, Ben, you got some feelings here. How do you play around Karakas?
Well, Karakas is like my Frank's Red Hot sauce. I put that in everything. Like
me too.
You really do. You put it in off-color decks.
I play over Maze of Ith now in Control.
Karakas is just like, as mentioned before, it's like the second utility land, like the second most played utility land in our format.
Behind what?
Wasteland. And
an answer to Karakas.
It's gotten to this point where myself and many other players have started to tailor the threats in their lists to cut down on legendary creatures.
You're getting to the second point, which is building around it. How do you play around
How do you play around it?
Yeah.
You don't really get much opportunity. You can sequence your cards in a way that puts out your non-legendary threats first. You can hold on to your Wasteland. This is something a lot of people don't do. Most decks get to free roll Wasteland. A lot of them also play, if you're more on the controlling side, you have Field of Ruin or Tectonic Edge, even Rished Port, stuff like that. You can at least set up these kind of spots where your opponent will feel more willing to deploy their Karakas, play it out early, and that's when you get them. One other way is taking advantage of the fact that their mana will hopefully be a bit more shaky since they are, if it's an off-color splash, then they're just playing this colorless land that they always will have to dedicate to a legendary threat if you deploy it. Or it will make their colors a bit awkward. There are definitely times in Jeskai or something like Esper where if you are primarily blue, you're going to want to have blue for your counterspell suite, and you might want to have red mana up or black mana for your removal spell, and you don't really have the luxury of just playing effectively a plains in the first couple of turns.
I've got a great line for Karakas. Hope your opponent forgets it exists and doesn't read your cards.
That you joke.
I am half joking.
Good. A short little anecdote. I was playing in this long, grindy control mirror, blue-white versus blue-white, and my opponent had a Karakas, and they played it out early, and it was in my head they had a Karakas. And I'm talking like a 40-minute game. And I take off my glasses at some point, rubbing my eyes, whatnot, and they had a new Karakas. And it's so lodged in my head that Karakas always has an old bordered word.
No.
And I'm like, all right, they got plains, island up. I can't really see what these cards are, but it's just mana. I'll go for this Alpha Strike. And then they Karakas by Vendilion Clique. I'm like, oh no.
Oh, I guess I'll die.
And that's That's another thing that's actually better against karakas. The flash legends are better against karakas. And also, if you're ever able to set up playing 2 legends on the same turn, it can constrain karakas.
I mean, I guess you're pretty happy if you get to clique them every turn and they're using karakas to give it back to
Yeah,
you.
I mean, we're also
and there are
back to...
yeah. On that note, there are some legendary creatures that just like, if they are karakasing this, it's probably not that bad for you.
Well, like Gonti, right?
Gonti, the new Nicol Bolas, the Ravager.
Yeah.
Like they discard every turn is not that bad for you.
Mm-hmm.
Vendilion Clique is another classic one. Venser, Shaper, Savant.
Yeah.
Like,
Where it's just like, well, I guess I can clique this, but it's not good.
Well, here's an interesting question to the table, and was put in my head by Ben. If you're playing around Karakas, if your legendary creature is really important to you and you know your opponent has it, do you miss your land drop to like sandbag Wasteland to try and set that up?
what do you mean?
What?
Are you implying like?
Because you're saying
You have Wasteland.
you have Wasteland in hand, and would you miss a land drop to hide the fact you have a Wasteland to get their crucial land, or like a Karakas or something like that?
I'd probably just play the
Yeah,
Wasteland.
you just play the land.
Well,
Because
It's like it's still going to get their Karakas anyways. Like you play the land and play the legendary creature and just let it get Karakas once.
yeah,
And then you just Wasteland them and then,
Well,
then it
Ben was
sticks.
talking about people often use the Wasteland too quick, and I was wondering if there was maybe some insight that I wasn't aware of. in that
Well,
case.
Well, they sacrifice it too quick.
Okay.
Not
Yeah.
necessarily play it.
they'll like play and be like, well, I can hit one of 2 dual lands that have the same color. Might as well.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just like, well, there's better uses.
I'm
for this
definitely
card.
That's what
guilty
you're
of
talking
that.
Yeah, just like I gotta get value out of it now. Instead of waiting for utility land or creature land or something like that. Yeah, there's a point, especially. I don't want to talk about that's long. How do you build around Karakas?
Rewind the tape about.
Yeah, sorry
two
about
to
that,
three.
Ben.
No, it's okay.
Play fewer legendaries, play legendaries that get benefit or don't care about Karakas. Like, we're back to Thrun again. It's like, Karaka who now?
Yeah.
Like, Thrun just stone cold doesn't care about this land existing.
Yeah, a lot of decks, because adding legendary to creatures is, one of the ways that they can print some of these more powerful low-cost cards, because they see this as a drawback, and then in a singleton format,
singleton,
we're
right?
just like, haha, we get to take
Yeah,
advantage of all these big.
It's unfortunate
Yeah.
you may end up cutting some very strong cards that are much worse against Karakas, like Tasigur maybe skedaddles out of your list at some point, because that one hurts.
Yeah,
That one
I mean,
hurts.
you can just revert. It's like the cards that you cut for these legendary creatures, often in these decks are not bad cards. Like you're like, oh well, in order to make room for Tasigur, I needed to cut something else on my top end, so I got rid of Thundermaw Hellkite. It's like, well, Thundermaw Hellkite is still just a big dumb dragon.
Yeah.
That's quite good at killing people.
I mean, if we're literally talking with this guy, there's, a perfectly good zombie fish you can put in his place.
yeah,
Gangler.
Gurmag, just angle them out.
The Gangler.
Any other comments on either playing around or building around the Karakas before we go? I mean, it's tough to say play less legends. Do you play more LD? No.
Maybe.
Usually.
I mean, don't dilute your own strategy to beat a card. I think is the common theme here.
Revoker name?
No, it doesn't.
No,
mean lands.
Revoker's not land.
Right.
You can play Sorceress Spyglass. I think that card's underplayed.
Card's quite good.
All right, let's move on to our new play around, a little segment we like to call the Bolt Test.
It does the removal.
Yeah, Ben, tell me about the Bolt Test here.
So this is something that pops up in pretty much every format over the history of Magic.
Every spoiler season.
When Bolt has existed. Yeah, you'll see it in Modern, Legacy, past Standard formats, where if Bolt exists, then a lot of the threats that are playable, you either have to allow Bolt to trade even, so cards like Delver of Secrets, I don't want to say Deathrite Shaman because that card's just broken, but stuff like that, right? You're going 1-for-1, but like playing a 2-drop or a 3-drop that just dies to Bolt without any kind of added advantage attached to it is a lot less appealing when your opponent can trade up. So you'll see cards that have 4 toughness or more,
Now, what do you
relevant
mean by
ETB.
what do you mean by trade up? Because
On
in the
mana.
that's specifically for that. So you're fine if they're using a lightning bolt to kill a 1-drop creature, and your differentiation here is if you're spending more than 1 mana, it has to be able to dodge bolt.
I was gonna say.
Well, I mean, not always. I mean, this could be an entire episode by itself. But like, you have to at least have a long, hard look at the threats that you're playing, and kind of gauge whether or not you're comfortable with using a slot in your deck and using your mana on a turn to deploy something that can just be easily taken out by a lightning bolt or a searing spear,
Sure.
Without providing you any kind of tempo advantage or card advantage.
Jerry, you had something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing. Basically, is that sort of add a third thing to that list is that if the upside on it not dying is super high, that's another reason you might add it in. Like if it is able to like get out of bolt range, or like if you're playing a Miracle Grow creature, for example, like you're not going to cut the 2-drops that grow to 4 toughness eventually, even though they don't give you any advantage, because the upside of them growing huge is just really high.
The presence of Lightning Bolt in Modern has not stopped people from playing Young Pyromancer, Dark Confidant, those kind of cards, right? Just because, they're going to die to Bolt and they might not have done anything, but these cards are so incredibly powerful that if they do get off the ground, they're
going to win you the game by themselves.
Yeah, and if they do die, who cares? Your initial investment was lower than other options. You're only paying 2 mana.
So we're playing a game of Magic. You're sitting across a red deck wins. You're sitting across a deck that has a lot of early removal, not specifically Bolt, but just the idea of they have early disruption, and you can tell that your game plan is going to have to play heavily into their removal. Somewhat like the counterspells, except it has more of a constraint to it. How do you play around these early threats?
Sorry, and we're the removal heavy deck?
No. You're playing into it. Again, the point of this episode is how do you play around this stuff?
I am Kurdape. Me Kurdape?
Okay, you're Kurdape.
You Kurdape, me Fire Blast.
What are you doing? You're the early aggressive creature deck. You're playing against a burn deck. You're playing against a deck that has a lot of early removal. How are you sequencing your play to play around these removal spells?
Me Kurdape play threat, powerful but low cost. Now, I would typically, you want to, again, this kind of relates to the bait spell, but just on a bit of a different axis. So you want to deploy threats that will prompt your opponent to use removal because they're going to, kill them or at least input enough damage.
Big Monkey represent 10-turn clock. Me, I'm use Searing Spear.
Yeah, exactly.
Make it not clock.
That's right, Grog.
Can we have like a caveman magic segment?
Well, I mean, I'll give a more concrete example or something like that. If you have threats like Scavenging Ooze or Tarmogoyf, cards that will eventually grow out of it, you can change your sequencing in such a way that they spend their early removal to get rid of cards you care less about, and then when you finally, maybe you play your Scavenging Ooze with mana up, so that you can activate in a way that responds to it. Or you play your Goyf out once a couple of turns have gone by. There's a creature of yours in the graveyard, there's a fetch land in the graveyard, there's an instant and maybe a sorcery. Yeah. And now your Goyf is either going to take 2 cards from them or be out of the range or something like that. That was more of the concrete example.
So in the same sense of you playing a Thrun or a Prowling Serpapard on the turn in which your control opponent is holding up mana, or not playing your threats when they're holding up counterspells, and effectively wasting their mana. Playing out, sequencing your threats, and so they might not want to use premium removal like a Fatal Push or a Lightning Bolt on stuff like a Kurdape or an Isamaru. I mean, that's you'll always just play your 1-drop, and they think, okay, well, I'll let that stick around, but I probably go to kill their 2-drop. Yeah. And then you play a Danto Vanguard. Or a Danto Vanguard.
Right. This card's sweet.
1 in a white for a 1/1 Vampire Soldier. As long as it's attacking, it gets +2/+0, and you can pay 4 life to make it indestructible until end of turn.
Woof.
No, it's okay. You'll pay 4 life every day of the week.
Yeah.
Twice on Sunday.
Yeah. And so, getting this down, they're like, I could bolt the creature, but they just get to pay 4 life and keep it around. I'll just kill the next creature. But then your deck, then they play a kitchen finks and stuff like that.
Or troll aesthetic.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, I've made
You're
a
like, I think
terrible
I'm just
mistake.
dead.
Yeah, and cards like Scavenging Ooze and Tarmogoyf are still going to be quite good on turn 5 or turn 6, right? So you sequence in a way that your cards that are they're going to lose their impact, like a Danto Vanguard on turn 9. It's not super exciting. Playing a 5/6 Goyf on turn 9, or playing a Scavenging Ooze with graveyards full of creatures and you got a bunch of mana hold up.
That's scary.
That's also quite good.
Anything in particular? We talked a little bit about like the toughness of creatures in build run that you'd want to add about building against the bolt test.
Yeah, another good way to do it, Ben mentioned this earlier, is just to play value creatures that do something when they enter. So playing cards like Wall of Blossoms, Wall of Omens, Coiling Oracle, things like that, cards that are like incidental and will slow your opponent down and get you value when they come into play are also, it feels really bad to have to Fatal Push a Wall of Blossoms. Or to have to, like, if your Coiling Oracle eats half a Forked Bolt, you're like,
The look on someone's face when they have to Lightning Bolt a Trinket Mage that has just found like Black Lotus or Walking Ballista.
Yeah.
Oh, it gets me up in the morning. It's
I've played that matchup before. That the Trinket Mage is just going to kill you. Like this Trinket Mage has dealt 12 damage.
Yep.
And you just ignore it. You're like, I can ignore this. I can ignore this. You're like, I can't ignore this. I'm just dead to this Trinket Mage. But Jared's example, specifically those ETB walls, when we were playing in the Friday Night Paper Fight against each other a couple weeks ago, I had to use combat tricks to try and push damage through his walls. And then Jared's laughing. He's like, yes, use removal of my walls. I already got what I wanted. I blocked. It replaced itself with a card, and now you're wasting a card on it? And I'm going to do my best Jer here.
the Russian judge gave you a 5 out of 10.
Wow.
All right, let us move on to a deck that I don't know how to beat. How do you beat Blue Moon? Let's go with playing against it first. Go ahead, Jared. What's your example?
Do you mean Blue Moon, the deck, or just like the like back to basics Blood Moon suite?
Let's talk about back to basics and Blood Moon, sort of that particular thing. So I love playing non-basic lands. They're very fun, and cards like Blood Moon and back to basics take all the fun out of it. What do?
So one of the best ways is to make sure your deck has access to enough basics. Lots of people own a lot of non-basic lands and like to put too many into their decks. So Ben and I are both huge proponents of, especially in mid-range decks, is playing as close to 10 basics as a minimum as you can.
It's like stop. You don't need to add. You don't always need to add like the Tainted Cycle from Torment.
You don't need all 3 pain lands.
Yeah.
Like you're like base blue. You probably don't need Battlefield Forge in your Jeskai deck.
No.
Actually, that's interesting. The land suite that I've been playing lately, if I'm in a 3-color deck, OG duels,
Yeah.
Rav duels,
Yeah.
all of the fetches,
Yeah.
and then that's it for duels. And then the rest are either basics or utility lands. So it might be like a Wasteland, a Karakas, and then everything else would be duels. And that gets me to
Sounds
3, 6, 15, 17 non-basics out of the whole thing.
It sounds like you're playing too many utility lands then, to me, if you're still having issues against Blood Moon and back to basics.
Well, I'm trying to change against it, but it's more the Platinum and Purion. But I digress. But that's how
Blue Moon's not playing Plats anymore.
Wait, what?
Yeah, you don't need Platts is old news.
Oh, he's dead!
Well, I mean, Platts will
The
occasionally
king is dead. Long live the king.
I mean, it's still like a doable thing. It's just most of the local pilots, at least, have gone off Platinum Empyrean and have been playing Torrential Gearhulk. And,
There's too many good artifacts that you want to be playing.
well, and just people had so many answers, so they lost too many times when they were like, well, Madcap, need this to resolve or I'm dead. And then the mono red player was like, smash it or
Upgrade.
upgrade
We're
it.
seeing the evolution
or
of
Goblin
the meta.
Crater Maker it.
beautiful.
Yeah.
And so now the Blue Moon players are just like staring at their opponents and they have like Smash a Braid and Goblin Crater Maker. And they're just like Inferno Titan. And then they're
You're like,
and
oh
their
no!
opponent's like, well,
Fiery Confluence,
yeah.
That's a paddling.
Now, going back to the 3-color example, I have very much changed how I make my decks because of the the prevalence of Bloodmoon or these style of decks, because not only is Bloodmoon and Back to Basics good in the Blue Moon deck, but there's even better decks when it comes to taking advantage of those cards. So you have to be aware of just how greedy your mana base is when you go into a tournament. So if I'm a 3-color deck and I know I'm against a deck that's probably running Bloodmoon, how can I play around that card? Any advice?
Fetch basics.
Well, yes and no. I've playing Blue Moon. Ben, I know, has seen this as well. I've won maybe just as many games by people fetching basics and not being able to cast their spells because they were playing around a Blood Moon that wasn't yet in play, than as I have actually playing Blood Moon and taking my opponent off their spells.
So are you suggesting if you're playing against Bloodmoon, just kill them and make them have it? Are we going back to the make them have it?
Well, no, but what I'm saying is fetch basics when you can afford to. Like,
Okay.
often people try to fetch all basics, and that's just excessive. You don't need all basics to cast your spells under Bloodmoon.
Yeah.
And you don't need to have access to all your spells. And when you're including cards that deal with Bloodmoon, like Reclamation Sage or versus Thrashing Brontodon, as an example, or Reclamation Sage versus Knight of Autumn in your 3-color deck, maybe if there's a lot of Blood Moons you want to include, that's a reason to include Reclamation Sage over the other 2 cards, even though the other 2 cards in a vacuum are probably more powerful. Having your answers to Blood Moon and Back to Basics only need 1 color of mana is often a huge boon in actually being able to deal with the card.
Then you only need basic forest and you don't have to worry about your other duels?
Yeah, the amount of times I've seen like mid-range decks being like, yeah, Abrupt Decay is my answer to Blood Moon.
No, it's not. That sounds terrible.
Never casted
Yeah,
that in years.
basic forest and basic island are like the 2 most important lands versus these Blood Moon decks. But you don't need to go ham on finding them early, because if you find too many basics, then you're just going to do what Blood Moon would have done anyways. You're not going to be able to cast your spells.
or you're not going to be able to play 2 spells in 1 turn to beat the counterspell aspect of Blue Moon, because your mana is going to be too poor in order to cast your multicolor spells that you need to cast in 1 turn.
Interesting. That's really good insight.
So it is good to keep in mind, but you need to make sure you're not beating yourself by doing it. Like, you're like, yeah, I'm playing around this card, but you're actually just playing into a line of play that doesn't win you the game. You have to make sure you stay within the range of lines of play that still win you the game.
It's like, I'm never going to be bricked on mana. Can't win, but I'll never be bricked on mana.
I guess that's neat. I guess, yeah, rather than if your opponent's strategy is to disrupt your mana base, if you disrupt your own mana base before they've even done that, you've basically handed them what their deck wants to do without making them play that card.
Yep.
Just like, I'm so afraid of counterspells, I'm just never going to cast anything.
Great.
And there have been instances where I've brainstormed Blood Moon away against 4-color decks because they just like clearly couldn't cast any of their spells, and I'm just like, I don't need this. I've already won. Like,
it's like
Alex?
a deterrent spell.
Yeah.
It's just like, how unfortunate. You played yourself.
Yeah. Oh, that's really funny. Well, let's talk about maybe a less dedicated LD strategy or less dedicated disruption strategy. Let's talk about single land destruction cards that are very prevalent. So one is Wasteland. And then even effects like Stifle, which is becoming more common now. So not as much original Stifle, but like Nimble Obstructionist.
and Disallow.
Disallow. So the catch there is if you go to activate a fetch land, so you crack your Flooded Strand, you pay a life, you sacrificed your land, your opponent stifles the trigger, you're now down a land, and oftentimes you're really behind on board from something like that. How do we play around those effects? Let's go with the classic example of a Stifle. So I know my opponent has a Stifle deck. They play a fetch land. You play a fetch land on your turn. How do you avoid yourself from getting goozled?
Timing.
Give me an example. How does the timing work?
Well, you gave this classic example the other day, excuse me, where they go to fetch and you respond to their fetch, not giving them an opportunity to stifle you. Like finding a window where they're not able to or not likely to get you.
That's kind of the classic, because it restricts their mana, which Nimble Obstructionist isn't the cheapest Stifle effect. Same with Disallow, right? 3 mana for that effect. So chances are they won't be able to do that. They won't be able to Shadow of Doubt you, which, I mean, I guess they could, but then they're also out of a land. And then sometimes they don't have the mana to play Stifle. It's not a huge, like, haha, check out this huge next level, but it's safer, right?
And in terms of timing as well, if you've gotten to the point where you think they have Nimble Obstructionist or Disallow and you really need your fetch land, just when you do it in terms of the turn cycle is also important. So doing it on their upkeep is usually the best, because then it ties up their mana for both their turn and your next turn. So if they do get you, then it gives you the biggest opportunity to take advantage of the cost to them.
So I often feel so many games are won in the first 3 or 4 turns on a Stifle or a Wasteland. Like the times that, you don't really care about that effect on turn 12. Unless it's, a pivotal counter on something like that. But it's those really early games where, your opponent goes like turn 1 Delver, pass, Stifle you with the Delver, and those tempo plays, those early setup plays. And that's where it's really important to sort of play around it.
Yeah, but the other thing you can do is if you think they have it, holding it up just costs them 1 mana every turn if it's Stifle, 3 mana every turn if it's Nimble Obstructionist or Disallow. So you can just, once again, wait. You can just not do anything.
Just be patient.
And then as long as they don't have the Delver into Stifle draw, as long as you're not getting really aggressively pressured, you have time. You can just wait.
Just play chicken.
Yeah, if a blue deck is just waiting, just keep playing your fetch lands and not cracking them. And then eventually, if you're another blue deck, you may have mana to counter their Stifle, or you may have a way to take advantage of the mana they have tapped.
Mental misstep.
So
that's really interesting.
That one's not actually good.
And it can often elongate the game, which the Stifle decks often don't want to do. They're often the tempo decks. They need to get out ahead early, and if they're just sitting there for 3 turns holding up a Stifle, that's not.
You're laughing.
Not good.
Similar to that,
their game plan.
How do you play around a Wasteland?
I mean.
Well, we can talk about the early Wasteland. There's sort of 2 ways to look at it. There's protecting your early lands with Wasteland, so the aggressive deck comes out and tries to set your turn behind. And then there's also, if you're playing the Academy deck, or you're playing the Hoof deck, and you're trying to keep that one very important land of yours alive.
Well, one thing you can do to make sure you don't get taken off colors is if you have some more important dual lands in your hand, to sandbag those. Like if you're playing Jeskai and you have Tundra, Volk, and Plateau, like not, or say you have Tundra, Hallowed Fountain, and Volk, leading on Tundra and Hallowed Fountain to make sure you don't get taken off red sources for the foreseeable future is more important, because they see 2 blue sources, they might try to Wasteland you to take you off double blue. It's happened a lot. I don't understand why people do it, but
I mean,
it happens. They just see a land and they're like, oh, get it.
I have to Wasteland as soon as possible. Well, there's often, you keep the 3-land hand, you get Wasteland, you never draw a 3rd land until it's too late.
It can happen, but
even with the example of Plateau, Volk, Tundra, if you are able to, depending on, I mean, it's a bit of a different discussion if you don't know what archetype you're against, but if you have some idea of what you're playing against, and aren't super locked into having a double blue counterspell on 2, then leading like Plateau into Volk is going to be a bit more beneficial. They'll probably hit the Volk, but the deck doesn't need double red too much. In fact, very rarely does Jeskai need double red outside of 1 to 2 cards.
Like the dragons at 5.
Yeah, you do need double white for a lot of your premier threats. And your deck has more blue sources than anything. And you're also just a high land count deck. So assuming that you will eventually draw a land, that land will probably be blue. You don't have to worry about double blue, but you make sure that you'll at least have double white.
Is there any wisdom in going back to the notion of baiting your opponent? Like you play out a land that they're maybe likely to go for to protect a land that they aren't.
Yeah, it's the same thing with the Plateau, Volk, Tundra example.
Yeah.
If they just lead on Wasteland turn 1, I'm playing Plateau 100% of the time. I'm just hoping they wasteland my plateau.
If they lead on Wasteland, go.
Wow.
I've done it.
I know it happens, but it's
And they're just like holding it. They're like,
Come on.
play a land.
it's just a very odd.
I'm gonna get you.
How did we get to here?
Can I also just say that like sometimes turn 1 Wasteland or turn 1 Stifle is not even good.
True.
Yeah.
If I had
Often turn 1
if
wasteland.
I had a
is
Not
dime
good.
for every time that local player did that to me and then just died later.
You mean me? That's awkward.
No.
I've definitely kept hands that are like Wasteland, Strip Mine, Green Source, Life from the Loam, and
No,
you're just like,
there's somebody
maybe I'll draw an
locally
extra one?
who like lives and breathes to stifle your first land drop.
Oh, okay.
You know, to the exclusion of any other solid game plan.
Huh.
So sometimes it'll be like, haha, I got your first land, and now I'm gonna die because I have no other action.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. All right, let's go to our last card that I'm excited to talk about, and actually the card that sort of brought about the whole topic. Our good old friend Umezawa's Jitte. This card's really neat, and I mean, obviously it's tough. I mean, you can build around it to make it better or worse, but there's a lot of words on this card. Legacy staple, especially after they changed the legendary rule, we now get the joy of sometimes dueling Jittes. How does one beat a jitte?
So, I've had a lot of experience on the receiving and giving end of this.
All right.
This utensil. Mine's maybe a little panic-based, but don't ever let anything pick it up,
Yeah.
and don't ever let it hit anything. Which sounds like obvious, but there's a variety of ways you can do that. You want to be trying to kill the creature after they've spent mana to equip it,
Yep.
which
Slows
wastes
them
their
down a bit,
resources.
yeah.
You want to, as much as possible, be able to defend yourself with like first strike creatures or creatures you can sacrifice before combat damage happens. That's a great one
Don't
that works
unsummon
against.
your own creature. Well, and sometimes obviously a little bit
Well,
because
it's a line that
yeah.
aristocrats can play. If you have a creature that has an ability to sacrifice itself, you block whatever's holding the jitte before damage. You sack it.
You all right there, Ben?
You
I'm
get
fine.
You get no jitte counters on it. I will often, and I don't even know if this is correct, but I will bend over backwards to prevent the first couple of counters from going on there, because once that happens, the snowball effect is just like so hard to
Talking
keep
about
up
like
with.
Jitte is online.
Yeah, you're like, oh,
Countdown
okay,
to loss.
we got
begins.
problems. Also, just smash it.
Yeah.
Just break the stupid thing.
No.
I mean, playing this is like example 1 or 2 of why you should have some kind of answer to artifacts if you can afford to have it in your deck. You look like you had some thoughts.
Yeah, Jared and Ben shared a little moment around Jitte here. Do you care to share?
We've played many a game with Jittes involved, and specifically ones with stack outlets.
Yeah, there was a game where Ben was playing Jeskai and doing quite well. He'd won several tournaments in a row. So I decided to sleeve up the lowest power level deck possible, Aristocrats. Just in a vacuum, the cards aren't very powerful.
Yeah, it's a little bit like
compared to Jeskai, where like
each one is like a
yeah.
complete
every
bomb.
card is just like the stone nuts.
This was when I was playing a more equipment-heavy version as well, and I believe we got to a point where I had a creature with both Sword of Fire and Ice, Sword of Feast and Famine, and Jitte, or Batterskull or something.
Batterskull.
Wow.
And turns out sack outlet plus colorless tokens.
Ooh, the Eldrazi.
There were also some white tokens.
Oh yeah, they're spirit tokens that were
Abzan
blocking the double
Ascendancy.
swords. Oh, God.
And so I beat Ben when he had a creature with those 3 equipment on it for like 5 or 6 turns in a row.
How do you feel about that, Ben?
And that was what ended
I want to
his,
go home.
his Jeskai mid-range Reign of Terror, the first take 1.
Mother of Runes is another good one against this, isn't it?
Yup.
Like protection creatures. You
Although
can just,
any situation that puts you into proactively using your Mother of Runes, where she can't just sit there and like, you're like, oh, you're going to kill my thing. All right, now I'll tap it. Anything where you have to be like, block, I'll tap it, then they kill your thing, and you're just like, oh.
It's like a Band-Aid for
Yeah.
a stab wound. It's not the best.
Building around, actually, I think it's more interesting. Let's talk about building around a Jitte. Jerry, you had a fun example when we were brainstorming this episode about what to do with the Jitte deck.
Yeah, so especially if you're battling jitte decks, or the same can be said about Bloodmoon or Back to Basics, there's going to be one deck in the matchup that more effectively uses the thing we're talking about. So, like, in the case of jitte, I think of White Weenie as the best, or Death and Taxes as the best jitte deck. It has lots of very efficient creatures. Many of the creatures have first strike, which is super relevant with jitte, and many of the creatures have double strike, which is even more relevant with jitte. You also have prevention effects like Harm's Way and Mother of Runes. You have flyers that are able to get in, whereas a mid-range deck that has just had 2 extra points in slotting in a jitte isn't going to have all these tools that make their jitte as effective as the Death and Taxes jitte. So in terms of building your deck to utilize these things, there are definitely choices you can make in order to make them more effective or less effective, as the case may be.
Any other thoughts on our good friend the Yeet before we move on?
God, I hate this card.
Yeah, it's okay.
Really
So
miserable.
like, this card is badly designed.
It's 2 points. It's an
Yeah,
equipment,
2
and
points
it's
for a
2
reason.
points.
It's like
Yeah, it's
I
game ruining.
just want to say that like GT is a really good card because it was designed poorly.
Yeah. I think this is like widely known that like they just messed up. Classic last minute changes to a new card type.
Well, yeah, this was like only the second set with equipment in it at all, and they're just
yeah.
like, this was
Doesn't do enough.
It used to add black mana, and it used to like give a creature +1/+1 or something. It used to be like very weird niche kind of abilities.
Why does it get 2 counters?
Well, the biggest issue for me is that it's combat damage, not
damage.
combat damage to a player.
Yeah.
That's the most heinous thing.
Yeah,
with
if it
the card.
only hit players like the swords do, I
Well,
think
as long as you could chump block to prevent counters, like
Yeah.
that would be fine. It would still be very good.
Yeah, I mean, as opposed to this thing just becoming like kryptonite.
But
Yeah.
Great art though.
Oh yeah, it's very
Great
good.
art.
Some dude getting sticked
right in
in the
the
moonlight.
oh.
There was a parting thought that I wanted to add. We may have spoken about this before in terms of playing around things. Sometimes don't, because you can't.
Make him have
Cowboy magic.
Cowboy magic. Well, it's just like there's certain things that are occupational hazards that it's just like, I'm just gonna fold to this card, and I could make my deck crappier to fold less hard, or I could just be a better deck.
Well, and all these things are contextual as well. You have to look at what resources you have available, how many cards and resources your opponent has available.
Yeah.
And if you're behind on resources and that's not going to change, waiting while both you and your opponent gain resources isn't going to help your situation.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, for a specific example about like Bloodmoon Back to Basics, like if you're in 4 color or 5 color, like you probably
Sorry.
you lose to this card, and there's not really anything you can do.
You can
about
put
it.
outs in your deck, but you're not always going to have them.
Yeah, exactly.
I love our episode is here's how you play around a card, but at the end of the day, don't.
Or
Forget everything we said.
Not quite.
what like just to cap on that, like one of the ways of don't play around it is just like, well, I guess it's kind of playing around it, like making like with Bloodmoon being an example, right? It's just like for the first couple of turns, don't play around it. Just kill your opponent. Just try to kill your opponent.
Just get 'em.
And then when they get Bloodmoon down, just kill them with things that doesn't care about Bloodmoon. Hazoret, red card. Thundermaw Hellkite, red card.
Play mono red. Become your worst.
Become
nightmare.
that which you hate.
Don't do that. Well, I mean, do that.
Don't
Don't
let your dreams be dreams.
All right. And all right, with that, that's our episode today. I hope you enjoyed it. It was an interesting example of sort of like case studies to play around certain cards, ways to build around it, and some of our experiences with dealing with fun cards. Let us move now, though, into our closing segment, Powerful Magic. Thank you. And up today, I got my boy Alex. Alex, regale us with a tale of magic.
This came from our most recent Highlander broadcast. This is maybe one of the kind of turns that makes me really love the deck Black Mold,
Yeah.
which is what I was on. Golgari aggro. makes really, really efficient use of its resources and mana sometimes. So the turn I was against Ben.
Uh-oh.
Can
And
I go now?
No. So you sit here and you listen to what you did.
endure the whole thing. I don't actually remember what I attacked you with. It was just some sort of, it was probably a piker or something.
Yeah, it was something. There was a trade involved.
It was a reasonable threat. Ben had 3 creatures.
Yeah, he had 3 creatures. I crack in with my 1 creature. You know, he blocks. It's, you know, a perfectly reasonable line. We have a trade. It looks like a normal turn of magic.
Yeah, Ben's board looks like he's finally stabilizing
A
his aggro.
Strangleroot Geist was involved in the attack.
Oh, okay.
So it was very, it didn't look as though it was a bluff attack. You're just like trying to push through damage and you're like, oh, if Ben blocks Strangleroot Geist, great, I get a 3/2 back.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I get my Geist back, and I'm like, oh wait, there's more. So I tap black and cast Malicious Affliction with
Morbid Online.
Morbid online. So Malicious Affliction is black for it's Doomblade. Destroy target non-black creature as an instant. If a creature died this turn, you get 2 Doomblades.
Okay.
Do you know that this is a trigger when you cast it? So 1 counterspell doesn't beat Unmorbided Malicious Affliction?
I did not know that.
Yeah, you copy the spell.
This card's real good.
Cool.
So I blow up
like
his other
Storm.
2
I didn't know
threads.
that. Okay. So Ben now has 0 creatures.
If it was Strangleroot Geist, I'm not even down a creature yet.
Yeah, no, that's a part of the story. You're not down like anything.
Yeah, well,
I think you're down a Dryad Militant or something, like a 1-drop.
I also had another black up, so I'm just like, oh, you know what else I should do is I should cast this Bone Picker
Like
My favorite monster
flying
trope.
death
for a
touch.
quarter what its cost normally is. Bone Picker 3 and a black for 3/2 flyer with Death Touch.
Sure.
It costs 3 generic less to cast if a creature died this turn.
I've just never seen such an aggressive turnaround in a game of Magic. That Alex goes from like, Ben has 3 reasonable threats, but is behind on life. Alex cracks it to push through damage, and it's just like, oh, you thought you were stabilizing, turning the corner, Ben. Well, into the shadow.
So you can do a lot with not very much mana, and the more you tighten your belt down onto these spells, you can have insano turns like this.
The morbid you tire.
Yeah, did you... There was another turn. I don't know if it was against you. But
Oh, there are a lot of turns where I got destroyed in this event.
Yeah, well, like Unearth, when I did that with Avatar the Resolute.
You did that against Cam?
Oh yeah, I made it huge.
Yeah.
It was so big. This is like definitely my favorite card. I crash in with Avatar the Resolute. It dies in combat. I think post-combat I played Skargan Pitsulk with like Bloodthirst.
One thirsty boy.
So put a counter on it. I had one other creature with a counter on it. I unearth Avatar. It checks both creatures and comes out as like a 5/4.
Yeah. 1 mana 5/4. D's.
Powerful magic.
Well, friends, that is going to be it for our episode today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. A reminder that this podcast is brought to you by you with your support over at the Patreon at patreon.com/LoadingReadyRun. Hope you have a fantastic time. With Desert Bus, there might be a bit, but we'll see you soon. Cheers.